The desert was cold that night. Not the kind of chill that bites the skin, but the deep, creeping cold that settles in the bones. Cowboy Jackson Cole sat beside a flickering campfire, boots half buried in warm sand, his worn hat tipped low over his eyes. He had just returned from a long cattle run near El Paso and was in no rush to return to town. His horse, Hank, stood nearby munching lazily on dry grass, tail twitching at the occasional desert gnat. Jackson wasn't a man prone to stories. He preferred action to talk and whiskey to speculation. But tonight was different. He was alone, and the wind had that ancient whisper to it, the kind that made the stars feel like watchers instead of lights. He tossed another log into the fire. As it cracked and popped, something strange happened. One of the logs split open with a hiss, and from inside the glowing wood slid out a blackened scroll tube sealed in iron. Jackson blinked and leaned forward, brushing ash away. The thing looked like it hadn't seen the light in decades, maybe more. "What the hell?" he muttered, pulling it out with his gloved hands. Inside, rolled tight and still crisp, was a parchment. He unrolled it carefully on a flat rock. It was a map, rough, hand-drawn, and aged like old leather. Across the top, in curling ink faded by time, it read, "Isle of No Return, Treasure of the Crimson King." There were strange symbols, ocean currents, latitude markings, and a trail that ended in a red X on an island shaped like a serpent coiled in sleep. At the bottom, a single warning in red ink, "Guarded by creatures that breathe no air, the sea remembers." Jackson's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't a pirate nor a sailor, but the promise of treasure and a place no cowboy had ever ventured stirred something wild in him. He wasn't rich, not by a long shot. The ranch barely stayed afloat, and the drought was only getting worse. But more than that, it was the thrill, the mystery, the adventure. He stood, rolling the map back into its tube. The firelight caught the edge of his silver belt buckle, and he muttered, "Well, hell, why not?" The next morning, Jackson rode into the nearby port town of Silver Bay, a rough and salty harbor wedged between dusty cliffs and the restless ocean. The streets smelled of brine, sweat, and cheap rum. Fishermen hollered over crates of mackerel while sailors brawled outside the taverns. Jackson wasn't here for fish. He needed a ship and a crew. He entered the Rusty Gull, the dirtiest tavern on the coast, because it was also the place where real seamen drank, those crazy enough to cross the Devil's Curve or brave the Scorpion Trench. At the back of the tavern, over a dark jug of spiced rum, he found the first piece of his crew. Eli Granger had been a bounty hunter once, quick with a revolver and quicker with a bet. Now he was broke, scarred from neck to shin, and had a gambler's gleam in his one good eye. But when Jackson unrolled the map, Eli's voice turned low. "You serious about this?" "I found it in the fire. I can't get more serious than that." Eli grinned. "You got yourself a gun." Next, they found Maria Vega, a woman who once sailed with the Crimson Corsairs and slit more throats than any sailor dared to count. She worked as a smuggler now, docked near the coral piers. At first, she refused, but the moment her eyes locked on the serpent-shaped island on the map, her voice dropped to a whisper. "I've heard stories about that place. No ship ever returns." "Maybe it's time one did," Jackson said calmly. She looked at him, then nodded once. "But I get first pick of whatever's gold. Deal." Finally, they sought out Old Man Sawyer, a half-blind storyteller who hadn't stepped on a ship in 20 years. He lived above a bait shop and claimed to know every current in the Southern Ocean. He studied the map with trembling hands. This belonged to Captain Varick himself. He sailed the Crimson Mare into the Serpent Sea and never came back. "Then that's the ship I want. Where is she now?" Sawyer coughed. "Dry docked and rotten near Old Hollow, but she'll sail again if you got the guts." Jackson nodded. "We're leaving in 2 days." That night, Jackson stood by the ocean, watching the waves crash against the dock. Behind him, the team had begun preparing the Crimson Mare, a beautiful, broken ship that once ruled the blood-red waters. Soon she'd carry them into legend, or into the deep. He pulled out the map again and held it in the wind. Somewhere out there, beyond the fog and thunder, the treasure of the Crimson King waited, and Jackson Cole was going to claim it, or die trying. Morning at Silver Bay was as rowdy as night, except with more cursing and fewer lanterns. Gulls shrieked overhead and saltwater wind clawed at the buildings. Jackson Cole rose early, standing atop the weathered deck of the Crimson Mare, inspecting her with a soldier's eye. She was bruised, battered, and scarred from 100 storms, but under the rusted bolts and cracked wood, there was still strength. "Seen worse ships floatin'," Eli Granger said from behind, juggling a silver coin between his fingers, "and a few better ones at the bottom." Jackson shot him a dry look. "She'll hold." Eli shrugged. "As long as she floats long enough to find that treasure, I don't care if she sinks after." Below deck, Maria Vega was already at work. She had traded her smuggler garb to worn leather armor and a flintlock pistol strapped to her thigh. She had sailed deadlier ships, but none with stakes this high. She moved like someone who belonged on a deck, with a knife in her boot and a plan behind her eyes. Barrels are filled, ropes coiled, sails patched. She didn't look up. "We're leaving on the tide." "She's got more fight than the ship," Eli muttered. In the shade of the harbor tavern, Old Man Sawyer sat on a rocking chair, sipping bitter-root tea as if the world weren't about to change. Jackson approached him with a question that had been gnawing since last night. "What do you know about this Crimson King?" Sawyer tapped the side of his cup. "Legend says he wasn't a king in the way we understand it. No throne, no crown, just fear, power. They say he ruled from beneath the sea. He knew magic, had sirens in his service. They say his treasure was cursed. Is that why no one ever returned?" Sawyer looked up, half his face in shadow. "That, and the monsters." "Monsters?" "Aye. Things the sea shouldn't birth, things older than the stars." "That's not helpful." Sawyer barked a laugh. "You're mad, cowboy, but I'll help you sail to hell if you'll let me read the stars again." They spent 2 days readying the Crimson Mare. A scrappy group of deckhands were hired, ex-cons, drunks, and outlaws, each with more grit than polish. Jackson didn't need saints. He needed men who wouldn't scream at the sight of blood, or worse. Eli brought aboard a bag of dynamite for persuading sea monsters to let go. Maria brought crates of salted pork, rum, and black powder. "We're not coming back empty-handed or hungry." Sawyer brought charts, maps, and a set of obsidian stones he claimed could hear the tide's soul, whatever that meant. Hank the horse was hoisted aboard too, snorting in protest as the ropes lifted him. The crew laughed, but Jackson ignored them. Hank had ridden through worse. The night before departure, the 4 of them sat around a crate and eating dried beef and staring out at the dark water. "You sure about this?" Eli asked, his voice low. "I mean, treasure's one thing, but monsters, magic, that ain't cowboy business." Jackson looked out at the horizon. "There was a time when men thought crossing deserts was impossible, but we did it. I don't see how the ocean's any different." Maria chuckled. "It's wetter, that's all." Sawyer leaned in. "You realize this ain't just some fool's chase. If we find what I think we'll find, the world won't be the same." "Good," said Jackson simply. "The world's been broken a long time." When dawn came, it came with fog. Thick and heavy, it rolled over the bay like smoke from a dragon's nose, as if the sea itself knew they were coming. The Crimson Mare creaked as she pulled away from the dock. Her sails flapped and caught the wind. The harbor grew smaller, then vanished behind the mist. Maria gripped the wheel, eyes narrowed, heading due southeast. Sawyer held a brass spyglass and mumbled to himself in a forgotten language. Eli lit a cigar and leaned on the rail. "No turning back now, cowboy." Jackson stood tall at the bow, coat flapping behind him. "No," he whispered. "Now it begins." Far ahead, beyond the fog and thunder, the serpent sea waited. And it wasn't alone. The crimson mare cut through the gray waves like an aging warrior with a sharpened blade. Scarred but not defeated, the fog hadn't lifted since they left Silver Bay, and every creak of the timbers echoed like a ghost's breath. The sea was oddly calm, but beneath its glassy surface, shadows moved. Too large, too smooth. Jackson Cole stood at the helm beside Maria Vega, who held the wheel steady with a sailor's poise. No gulls, no fish, no wind shift. Feels like the sea's holding its breath. Eli Granger lounged on a barrel near the forecastle, polishing his revolver. Maybe it's just being polite, waiting for us to die before it makes a mess. From below deck came the rhythmic clink, clink, clink of Old Man Sawyer setting up strange black stones on a weathered map. He claimed the stones could sense the shifts in the ocean's soul.
Hours later, with the Devil's Chain behind them, the sky opened slightly. A soft light filtered through the clouds, neither moonlight nor sun, but a pale shimmer like a lantern under milky water. They weren't alone. Beneath the sea, glowing shapes drifted, trailing long tendrils. Giant luminous creatures pulsed in the dark like heartbeats. The water shimmered green, then blue, then purple. "What in God's name?" Maria whispered. Sawyer stepped forward. "The Beeplings, ancient feeders. They follow those who pass this route. Some say they remember the Crimson King." Jackson narrowed his eyes. "They follow treasure? They follow blood." As if summoned, one of the creatures broke the surface, a massive eye rising from the water like a pale sun. It watched the ship silently before sliding back down, leaving only silence in its wake. Eli reloaded both his revolvers. "Next time it blinks, I shoot." That night, Jackson stood at the bow, the sea stretching into a horizonless void. The stars above blinked slowly, distorted by ocean mist. He pulled the map from his coat and stared at the inked symbols again. Isle of No Return, treasure of the Crimson King. A red trail curved past symbols, tentacles, a mermaid, a crown made of coral. One symbol glowed faintly in the firelight, a swirling vortex just ahead. Suddenly, a clang echoed from below deck. Eli's shout followed. "Something's inside the hull!" Jackson rushed below with Maria on her heels. In the cargo hold, crates had been split open. Salt water pooled across the floor, but the hull was intact. In the middle of the chaos stood a single wet footprint. Human, bare. Maria raised her pistol. "We didn't bring any barefoot ghosts." Sawyer arrived, staring at the print. A stowaway, or worse? "No one gets aboard this ship without being seen," Jackson said darkly. "If someone did, they didn't walk through the deck to get here." Eli knelt and touched the water. Still warm. Outside, a wave hit the ship, gentle like a knock, then another. Jackson turned back toward the map. The glowing vortex shimmered again. Something was waiting. "Tomorrow," he said, voice low, "we'll see what kind of devil guards this sea." The next day, the fog began to twist, rising upward like smoke from burning oil. The water bubbled around the ship. Beneath them, a whirlpool spun into being, slow and steady, not sucking them down, but guiding them forward. It wasn't natural. It was deliberate. Maria stood at the helm, jaw clenched. "We're not turning around, are we?" "No," Jackson said. The ship began to descend, slowly, almost peacefully, into a swirling funnel of mist and light. Around them, the sea rose into walls. Above, the sky vanished. Eli muttered,
This ain't sailing. This is drowning politely. The Crimson Mare was no longer sailing across the ocean. She was being pulled into it, into the place where sunlight died. And far below, unseen but deeply felt, something opened one vast, unblinking eye. The world narrowed to a tunnel of fog. The Crimson Mare drifted silently, her sails limp, her wood groaning with each subtle shift of the sea. No wind touched their faces. No stars blinked above. Only the steady swirl of the ocean and the sound of breath, shallow, cautious, waiting. Jackson Cole stood at the bow, hand resting on his revolver. The silence was unnatural, heavier than nightfall and deeper than the sea. Old Man Sawyer stepped onto the deck, his face pale. "We've entered the Whispering Channel." Eli, leaning near the main mast, scoffed. "Sounds like a name made by sailors to scare children." "No," Sawyer said grimly. "It's the place where the sea remembers the voices of the dead." As if summoned by the word dead, a sound broke through the fog. A voice. Not a scream, not a shout, a whisper. "Jackson." He froze. His name had been said, but no one on the ship had spoken it. Maria gripped the wheel tighter. "I heard something too. A voice." Eli stood up slowly, face tense. "Man said, you left me." All around them, the fog thickened. Shifting shapes moved within it. Silhouettes of people, faces, eyes. The whispering grew louder. "Turn back. She waits. The king will rise. You cannot take what is his." Jackson stepped forward, pushing past the confusion. He stared into the fog, and for a moment he saw a figure, tall, draped in seaweed, wearing a crown of coral. Its face was featureless, except for a slit where a mouth should be. Then it vanished. The ship lurched suddenly, as if struck from below. Barrels rolled, crewmen shouted, Sawyer fell, his stones scattering. Water poured across the deck, then retreated. A voice roared through the fog, no longer a whisper, but a command. "Turn back, thief." Jackson drew his revolver, heart pounding. "We go forward." The fog erupted. From the mist, ghostly figures surged aboard, pale, waterlogged corpses with sunken eyes and fingers like eel tentacles. The crew screamed. Blades rang out, gunshots cracked. Eli fired both his revolvers into a creature's face. It staggered, then dissolved into mist. "They're not real!" Maria stabbed another in the gut. It screamed, not in pain, but in laughter, and vanished in smoke. "These are illusions," Sawyer shouted from the deck. "They feed on memory. Do not listen to them." Jackson looked around, trying to stay grounded, but then he saw his brother, drowned 10 years ago, standing on the deck, soaked, lips blue. "Jack," the ghost said, "you left me." Jackson blinked. "You're not real. Come with me." Jackson raised his revolver and fired. The image shattered. The fog began to crack apart like glass hit with a hammer. Light pierced it. The air shifted. The Crimson Mare surged forward suddenly, like something had let go of her hull. The fog thinned, then vanished behind them, as if sucked back into the sea. Only silence remained. The bodies of the ghostly attackers were gone. No blood, no damage, just the echo of their voices in the crew's ears. Maria was breathing hard, knuckles white on the wheel. That was no storm. Eli wiped sweat from his brow. That was a warning. Sawyer nodded. We passed the first test. The Sea King guards his secrets well.
Jackson stared ahead. There, on the horizon, rising like a tooth from the ocean, was a black spike of rock, the edge of the Serpent Sea. They were past the point of no return, and whatever came next would be real. The fog was gone, but the sea hadn't calmed. Instead, it had gone still, too still. Not a single ripple danced upon the dark green surface. The sails hung limp, and the only sound was the slow groaning of the crimson mare, as if the ship herself could feel what lay beneath. Jackson stood at the prow, his knuckles white around the railing. He could feel it. Something ancient stirring beneath the calm, a pressure in the air, a weight on his chest. Maria scanned the horizon. No birds, no clouds, no current. "That's not calm," Old Man Sawyer said from behind. "That's waiting." Eli Granger spit into the sea. "I don't lock it. Feels like the water's holding its breath."
Then the water moved. It wasn't a wave. It was a ripple the size of a small house, rising smoothly from beneath the ship and drifting off to starboard. A dark shape passed just below the surface, long, smooth, and sinuous. Hank, the horse, whinnied loudly below deck. "Eyes on the sea!" Jackson shouted. "Something's out there!" Suddenly, the sea exploded. A massive barnacle-covered serpent burst from the water, towering 3 stories high. Its scales shimmered like wet emeralds, and its eyes glowed yellow with ancient hunger. A long fin ran down its spine like a razor, and gills flared along its neck, spitting steam. The crew screamed. One deckhand dropped his harpoon and bolted, only to be swept off the ship by the serpent's tail as it slammed down. The serpent let out a screeching hiss that shook the sails. "Move!" Jackson roared. "Man the cannons!" Maria grabbed the wheel and spun it hard, trying to angle the ship. "Hold her steady!" Eli raised both revolvers and fired into the beast's face. The bullet struck its eye and bounced off like pebbles. "Of course," he muttered. "Giant sea lizards bulletproof." The serpent dove, vanishing below. Jackson ran to the side, heart hammering. "Brace!" The crimson mare rocked violently as the beast struck from below, sending water and crew flying. Old Man Sawyer, soaked and clutching a post, shouted, "You must wound the soft points, gills, tongue, under the jaw." Maria shouted, "We have to bleed it, or we're sunk." Jackson kicked open a storage locker and pulled out 2 sticks of dynamite, shoving them into a canvas satchel. Eli blinked. "We're bringing dynamite to a sea serpent fight?" Jackson grinned. "Better than bad aim." He ran across the slick deck, tying 1 stick to a harpoon. "We shoot this into its mouth." Maria loaded the cannon with a metal net and a ball wrapped in chains. "We're not surviving unless we do more than scratch it." The serpent rose again, this time from the other side, jaw open, teeth like scythes. Jackson hurled the harpoon with everything he had. It soared straight into the monster's gaping mouth just as it lunged at the ship. Boom! A muffled explosion erupted from within the serpent's throat. The beast let out a screeching, choking roar and thrashed wildly, sending geysers of salt water into the air. Blood poured from its gills. Eli shouted, "That did it!" The serpent rose once more, its body arching like a collapsing tower, then crashed into the water with a massive splash, churning the sea into chaos. For a long moment there was silence. Then, slowly, the water stilled again. Only the serpent's lifeless tail floated in the distance, bleeding into the waves. The crew was shaken, some injured, 2 lost. Jackson looked out over the deck.
Blood and seawater ran in rivulets. Cannon ropes were snapped, the sails were soaked, but they were alive. Maria leaned against the wheel, panting. "We just killed a sea god!" Sawyer looked pale. "No, that wasn't a god." Jackson turned to him. "Then what was it?" "A guardian, one of many." That night, the crew buried their dead at sea. 2 men who had joined for coin, adventure, or perhaps just to run from their past. Jackson stood at the rail and watched their wrapped bodies slide into the deep. He clenched his jaw. This journey had cost them blood, and it had only just begun. Somewhere ahead was the Isle of No Return. And if that serpent was only the welcome party, the real horrors still waited. The sea turned beautiful the next morning, too beautiful. After the serpent's bloody demise, the crew of the Crimson Mare expected fury, waves, and storms. Instead, they found skies so blue they bordered on surreal. The sea gleamed like sapphire, glassy and clear to the depths. Not a cloud stirred above, not a breeze ruffled a sail. Maria narrowed her eyes. "I don't like it." Old Man Sawyer stood near the mast, squinting toward the horizon. "This isn't nature. This is seduction." Eli leaned against the rail, wiping his revolvers. "Well, after that lizard yesterday, I'll take pretty over deadly." Sawyer turned to him, voice sharp. "Sometimes they're the same." By midday, the crew heard it. A song, high, haunting and distant. Soft as wind through reeds, but more melodic than any human throat could shape. It drifted over the water like mist, growing clearer as the sun rose higher. Jackson stood still at the bow. "Is that singing?" Maria stiffened. "Don't listen." Too late. Several deckhands stood motionless, their heads tilted toward the sound. One dropped his rope, another let go of the wheel. The song was hypnotic, filled with longing, sorrow, and impossible beauty. It reached into the soul, unearthing forgotten grief and desperate hope. Even Jackson felt his thoughts slow, like sinking into warm water. Then he saw her. Rising from the sea, half a mile ahead, stood a small rocky isle draped in coral and flowers. Upon it sat a woman, bare-skinned, with hair like black silk dripping with pearls. Her eyes shimmered violet, her smile was soft and inviting. Her voice was the song. Eli took a step forward. "She's beautiful." Maria slapped him hard. "Don't move." "I'm just looking." "No, you're listening. That's worse." Old Man Sawyer gripped a talisman at his throat. "She's not alone." Suddenly the water boiled. Dozens of mermaids surged from the depths, but not the beautiful kind from sailors' tales. These were twisted, monstrous things with shark teeth, eel tails, and claws that gleamed like knives. Their smiles were cruel. One of the entranced deckhands leapt into the sea, arms open. Jackson grabbed his collar mid-leap and yanked him back. "Stay with me." The Siren Queen on the rock never moved. She simply sang louder. Maria roared, "Brace for attack!" The mermaids struck fast. They latched onto the hull, climbing with unnatural speed. One tore open a deckhand's throat before vanishing into the water with his body. Another slashed at Eli, who ducked and fired, blowing its head apart in a spray of black blood. Jackson hurled a harpoon into one's chest, pinning it to the mast. It shrieked and hissed, before dissolving into foam and salt, vanishing like sea mist at dawn. The song didn't stop. The crew fought, but they were outnumbered, overwhelmed by their own minds. One man walked straight off the ship into the sea, eyes glassy. Maria grabbed a burning torch from the galley and waved it at two approaching sirens. "Fire! They fear fire!" The creatures recoiled, but only briefly. Jackson turned to Sawyer, yelling over the chaos, "How do we stop the song?" Sawyer looked up at the rock. "She's the source. Kill her. The others die." Eli swore. "And how do you kill a mermaid queen?" Jackson didn't answer. He was already running to the forward cannon. He jammed a stick of dynamite into the barrel and aimed it at the distant rock. The Siren Queen locked eyes with him. Her voice rose, high, sharp, beautiful. For a heartbeat, Jackson froze. Then he pulled the fuse. The cannon fired. The round soared across the sea and struck the rock just below the Queen. Boom! A massive explosion shattered coral, and flames surged upward. The siren screamed, not a song, but a raw, guttural wail that split the sky. Every siren on the ship shrieked and writhed, then turned to foam and salt, vanishing like sea mist at dawn.
The crew gasped, blinking. Those who'd been entranced staggered. The one Jackson had saved from jumping looked around, stunned. What? What happened? Eli groaned and dropped to the deck, blood on his arm. We got serenaded by sea demons. Maria helped douse a small fire from the cannon's blast. Next time, shoot first, listen, never. Sawyer watched the last of the foam drift away. She was one of the Sea King's daughters. There will be more. Jackson didn't reply. He stood silent, his hands still trembling from the spell, his mind echoing with the haunting notes of the mermaid's song. They had survived again. But the deeper they sailed, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a cursed journey. It was war. The sea turned gray and moody as twilight approached. The calm after the mermaid attack felt fragile, like glass underfoot. The Crimson Mare sailed on, patched but bruised. The crew moved quieter now, more careful. Their laughter forced, their steps wary. Everyone had seen something they couldn't explain, but one person among them had looked into the eyes of the Siren Queen without a trace of fear. That person was Maria Vega. She stood alone on the quarterdeck, leaning on the rail. Her long braid whipped in the wind, and her hand rested not on a sword, but on a small rusted medallion hidden beneath her shirt. Jackson Cole approached her silently. "Something's on your mind," he said. Maria didn't turn to look at him. "The sea's alive out here, Jackson, and it remembers people like me." "What kind of people is that?" She paused. Then she turned to face him, and her voice lowered. "You ever hear of the Crimson Corsairs?" "Only the worst. Pirates, raiders, ghost makers. Stories say they made pacts with the ocean." "They weren't just stories," she said. "I sailed with them." Jackson's jaw tightened. "You didn't mention that before." "Because I figured fighting sea monsters together would earn your trust faster than my resume." Jackson exhaled through his nose. "And?" Maria stepped closer. 10 years ago, we found a map, just like yours. It led to the Serpent Sea. I was there. I was young, hungry, wild. She pulled out the rusted medallion. On it was etched a spiral serpent wrapped around a star.
Captain Juno led us into the waters. We thought we'd return as legends. And we didn't return at all. She stared out at the waves. One by one, the crew died. Or worse. Some went mad. Some walked into the sea willingly. I was the only one who made it back to land. Jackson looked her dead in the eyes. Why didn't you say any of this before? Because I thought I could handle it this time. That maybe I owed someone a second try. Jackson was quiet a long moment. Then why help us? Why sail right back into the storm? Maria smiled grimly. Because I left something behind. Something worse than gold. And if it's still out there, I need to finish what I started. That night, a storm threatened the horizon, black clouds rolling toward them like a wall of smoke. The crew scrambled to fasten sails and secure ropes. The air turned thick with tension. Jackson went to Old Man Sawyer, who had spread the map in his obsidian stones across a crate again. She knew this sea, he said quietly. She's been here before. Sawyer nodded. Her kind don't sail into the Serpent Sea. They survive it. Think we can trust her? I think it doesn't matter. We're all dead without her. Lightning split the sky as the first drops fell. Rain poured in sheets. Thunder rolled like drums of war. The crimson mare pitched violently with each wave. The storm wasn't just nature. It was vengeance. Maria took the wheel without hesitation, shouting orders in the tongue of old sailors. Reef the mains! Tighten those lines! If this ship breaks, so do we! Eli was already roping barrels, yelling at younger hands to move faster. I told you the sea hated cowboys. Jackson grabbed the forward rigging, helping tie the sail as it threatened to rip free. The ship rose on a wave, higher than a house, then came crashing down, wood screaming. But Maria held the wheel firm. This isn't the worst storm I've seen, just the loudest. Hours passed. The sea tested every plank, every rope, every soul. But when the sun rose again, red as blood, the crimson mare still floated. Battered, cracked, but alive. The storm passed like a judgment. Maria dropped to the deck, soaked and shaking. Jackson knelt beside her. Are you all right? I've been worse. He helped her to her feet. You're not the same woman who sailed with the Crimson Corsairs anymore. She looked at him. No, but the sea doesn't forget. And neither should we. They stood in silence, watching the red sun rise. Ahead, dark mountains emerged on the horizon, cloaked in mist rising like teeth. The Isle of No Return was near, but also the past Maria Vega thought she had buried. The sea had a stillness that felt like a held breath, waiting, calculating. The sun hovered pale and distant, casting long reflections on the water like fractured glass. All around the crimson mare, there was no sign of life, just silence, and the creeping sense of being watched. Maria Vega stood at the wheel, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Jackson Cole stood near the bow, scanning the waters with his spyglass. Old Man Sawyer muttered over his obsidian stones again, brow furrowed in concentration. That's when the bell rang, a low, metallic clang from the crow's nest. The lookout, a young sailor named Finch, was pale when they looked up at him. "Ship!" he called. "Off the port bow!" Eli Granger snapped to attention and raised his revolver even before turning to see it. "We expecting company?" "No," Maria said, voice tight. They turned. From the mist emerged a black ship, sails torn, masts cracked but still standing. It moved without wind, no oars, no ripple in the water, just smooth, eerie glide. Its figurehead was a sea serpent, and its name, barely visible in faded silver letters, was the Leviathan's bride. Sawyer took one look and dropped his stones. No, that ship burned 40 years ago. I watched it sink. Eli browed a brow. Well, someone forgot to tell it that. The phantom ship came closer. No flags, no crew visible. But as it passed within 100 yards, something moved aboard. Shapes, figures, like men, but not quite. Through his spyglass, Jackson saw them. Sailors with hollow eyes, faces half-eaten by barnacles and rot. Men bound in chains of seaweed. A captain with coral growing through his rib cage. They were dead, but not resting. "They're watching us," Maria whispered. As if on cue, the ghost ship changed course, mirroring the Crimson Mare exactly. Left turn, it turned. Right, it followed. Eli squinted. "That's more than creepy. That's personal." Sawyer's voice was hoarse. "There are legends of ships that guard the Serpent Sea, crewed by those who failed the journey, cursed to patrol the waters for eternity." Jackson turned to Maria. "Could they be corsairs?" She didn't answer, but her hand gripped the wheel tighter. Then the wind shifted, and the air filled with a sound. Not a whisper this time, but a chant. Low, in a language no one understood. Deep, rhythmic, from the throats of the dead men aboard the phantom ship. It sank into the bones, set teeth on edge, made hearts race. The Crimson Mare rocked as if the sea recoiled from the sound. Maria shouted, "Ready the cannons!" Jackson raised a hand. "Wait!" The ghost ship drifted closer, then slowed. The chant ceased. And then, the captain of the Leviathan's bride raised one rotted hand and pointed.
The waves began to rise, not tall, but sharp, as if pushed by some unnatural force. Then the first bone appeared. A femur, bleached white, floating upright like a buoy. Then a skull. Then a rib cage. Then dozens, hundreds, thousands. A storm of bones. The sea was no longer water, but a churning field of remains, jagged bits of skeleton rolling with each wave, clicking like teeth. Every splash echoed like the rattle of chains. The Crimson Mare sailed right into it. The ship lurched violently as bones struck the hull, scraping and knocking. Ropes tore loose, a mast cracked. The deck turned slick with seawater and shattered bone. Maria shouted, "Brace the sails! Turn the wheel slow! We cut too hard! We'll rip the rudder!" Jackson drew his gun, but there was no enemy to shoot. The enemy was the sea itself. Eli cursed. "They're not just bones! They're cursed! They're moving!" Sure enough, long skeleton arms began to rise from the waves. Not entire bodies, just fragments. Hands that reached, jaws that snapped, vertebrae that twisted like snakes. One crewman screamed as a ribcage wrapped around his legs and dragged him overboard. Jackson lunged and caught him, barely, firing a round into the skull below the surface. It burst, and the bone arm retreated. Old Man Sawyer raised his talisman and began to chant. The bones writhed in agony, the sea howled louder, and lightning cracked overhead. But slowly, the storm of bones began to withdraw. The ship rocked violently one last time, and then it was still. Silence. The sea turned black again. Only a few bones floated now, quiet, like the aftermath of a feeding. The crew was shaken, bloodied, but alive. Maria sat on the deck, arms scratched, hair soaked.
Jackson stood behind her, breathing hard. Sawyer collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest. Eli finally spoke. "I've seen gunfights. I've seen bounty hunts gone wrong. I've even seen a man try to ride a wild bull drunk." He paused. "But nothing, and I mean nothing, is worse than a sea that throws bones at you." Later that night, the crew lit no lamps. They whispered instead about the ghost ship, the serpent, the mermaids, and now the grave water. But Jackson sat alone at the bow, holding the map again. The serpent-shaped island was closer now, and its lines were glowing faintly, almost alive. Maria joined him, sitting quietly. He didn't look at her. "Tomorrow?" she asked. Jackson nodded. "Tomorrow, we reach the Isle of No Return." Maria's voice was soft. "And what happens then?" Jackson's hand closed around the map. "We dig up a king's grave." The sun never rose. Not properly. It simply leaked pale light through a blood-red haze as the crimson mare approached the shadow that loomed from the sea, a twisted mass of black stone, jagged cliffs, and towering spires covered in green moss and crimson coral. The Isle of No Return. It didn't look like land. It looked like a fossilized creature, something ancient that had crawled out of the sea and died with its mouth wide open. Jackson Cole stood at the bow, eyes locked on the island. The waves grew sluggish the closer they drew, as though the water feared what lay ahead. Maria Vega stood beside him, quiet and alert. Her hand rested on her cutlass, and beneath her shirt, the old pirate medallion burned against her chest. She could feel it now, pulling her. Eli Granger emerged from below deck, pale and bruised from the bone storm. "We really doing this?" "We didn't come this far to turn back," Jackson said. Old Man Sawyer appeared, a book in one hand, his face haggard. This island was once above the sea, part of an ancient kingdom. It sank when the Sea King died, and his treasure went with him. Eli raised a brow. "So we're just walking into his grave?" Sawyer looked up, more like trespassing. The ship scraped against dark stone as it docked. A narrow shore stretched along the base of the cliffs, littered with broken weapons and rusted armor. Skeletons sat against rocks, some with swords still embedded in their ribs, others with helmets fused to their skull. No birds, no wind, just the sound of water lapping against ancient death. Maria stepped onto the sand first. "Let's move before something notices us." They disembarked, Jackson, Maria, Eli, Sawyer, and 6 remaining crew members, armed with rifles, pistols, blades, and explosives. They hiked through narrow canyons of volcanic glass and climbed over coral-choked rubble. Strange ruins emerged, pillars carved with symbols not seen on any map. Some pulsed faintly when Sawyer passed, reacting to his obsidian stones. "It's reacting to bloodlines," he murmured. "This place remembers." They found the first marker at midday, a great stone gate, half collapsed, covered with carvings of the Crimson King, a tall figure with a crown of thorns, holding a trident and standing atop a pile of skulls. His eyes were 2 sunstones, and they glowed faintly. "This is it," Maria whispered. "The outer wall." Eli frowned. "That means the treasure's behind it?" "No," Jackson said. "That means the real danger is." As they passed through the gate, something moved in the shadows behind them. A flicker, a growl, then silence. The island was watching. At the heart of the island stood a temple carved into the rock itself, a massive spiral tower, now broken at the top, where vines and sea salt had worn down its majesty. They entered cautiously, torches lit. Inside, murals covered the walls, scenes of sacrifice, sea battles, and a crimson crown rising from the ocean like a sun. Under one mural, a long stone table sat undisturbed. Upon it,
5 golden masks stared upward, their faces twisted in agony. "This is where he was buried," Sawyer said. "The Sea King." Jackson stepped forward, toward the altar at the end of the chamber. There, half buried under coral and dust, was a chest, thick, black, wrapped in silver chains. His fingers brushed the lid. Suddenly, a pulse ran through the chamber, deep and loud like a war drum. The ground shook, the murals bled, the stone doors slammed shut. Sawyer stumbled back, eyes wide. "You touched his tomb!" Jackson turned, revolver in hand. From the darkness behind the altar, something rose. A figure, tall, robed in shadow and coral. Its crown was jagged, fused to its skull. Its eyes burned gold, its mouth opened, not to speak, but to scream. The Crimson King had awakened. The scream tore through the temple like a cannon blast, vibrating the bones of every soul within. It was not the cry of a man, but of something ancient, enraged, and betrayed. The Crimson King stood tall at the far end of the chamber, half man, half coral, draped in robes that moved like seaweed. His face was no longer flesh, but shell and bone, crowned with a reef-like halo of thorns and rusted jewels. Jackson stood frozen, his revolver raised but useless. Eli stepped beside him, both guns drawn, whispering, "Shooting him feels like shooting a storm." Old Man Sawyer dropped to his knees, his eyes wide. "He's awake, and the pact is broken." "What pact?" Maria hissed, blade in hand. Sawyer looked up, his voice shaking. The Sea King was sealed by blood. Only blood could keep him sleeping, and only ambition could wake him. Jackson clenched his jaw. "Then I guess we just rang the dinner bell." The Crimson King raised his hand, and the 5 golden masks on the altar screamed to life. They rose, hovering in the air, and snapped onto the skulls of long-dead warriors that clawed out of the temple floor. Seaweed-wrapped bones, ancient armor, black tridents gripped in skeletal hands. Eli fired first, one shot between the glowing eye sockets of a masked corpse. It fell, but another rose instantly. "They keep coming," he shouted. Maria dodged a blade, slashing one masked creature through the ribs. It shattered, but its mask hovered and latched onto another corpse. Sawyer shouted, "The masks are the source! Destroy the masks, not the bones!" Jackson aimed at one hovering near the ceiling. Bang! Shattered it mid-air. The creature beneath it collapsed, silent and still. Maria nodded. "Aim higher." The battle turned fierce. Jackson reloaded on the move, his aim sharp, his nerves steel. Maria danced between attackers, cutting and dodging like a flame in a storm. Eli, with his twin pistols, shot 2 masks at once and kicked a third back into the shadows. Sawyer used his talisman to burn one mask with arcane fire, screaming chants that hadn't been spoken in 100 years. The last mask hissed and lunged for Jackson. He caught it midair, bare hands, and crushed it against the altar stone. It shrieked, cracked, and shattered into dust. For a moment, there was silence. Then,
the sea boiled above them. The temple shook beneath their feet, and between the two raged a war, centuries in the making. Jackson Cole stood beneath the spiral opening in the temple's ceiling, the whirlpool spinning above like a storm's eye. Water churned in a perfect column, held back only by the Sea King's will. His skeletal hand extended, his trident gleaming with coral flame. Beside Jackson stood Maria Vega, bloodied, breathing hard, sword in hand, as her former captain, Juno, slithered and snarled, her serpentine body circling the altar. Her armor was fused to her flesh, her eyes no longer human. Eli Granger crouched behind a broken pillar, reloading his last bullets. "Jackson, tell me there's a plan other than die creatively." Jackson's eyes never left the whirlpool above. "There's always a plan, but this time it starts with a leap." Old Man Sawyer turned, eyes wide. "You're going into the current? That spiral leads to the crown chamber, the sea's heart. No man's ever returned from it." Jackson smiled. Then I'll be the first. The Sea King raised his trident, and the whirlpool lowered like a living serpent, threatening to swallow them. Jackson turned to Maria. Get the others out. When the current breaks, run. Don't look back. I'm not leaving you alone in there. Yes, you are. You have your own ghost to kill. She locked eyes with Juno. The twisted mermaid captain circled like a predator, scales shimmering with dark magic. Maria gritted her teeth. I'll handle her. Jackson ran. Then he leapt upward into the spiral vortex. The water took him in. Inside the spiral, Jackson was no longer falling. He was floating, weightless in a tunnel of spinning ocean. Time bent, sound slowed, visions flashed around him, fragments of the past, ships sinking, men drowning, gold coins melting into blood, the Sea King's crown glowing red, sinking slowly through the depths, and then the present. He emerged into a massive undersea chamber made of coral and bone, a floating dome beneath the sea. In its center, suspended by chains of black kelp, was a sarcophagus. Above it hovered the crimson crown. The Sea King appeared in the chamber a moment later, rising from the floor like mist. You have come far, thief, but you will not leave with my power. Jackson drew his revolver. I didn't come for your crown. I came to bury it. He fired. The bullet struck the chain, not the king, and snapped it in two. The sarcophagus swung, cracking against coral. The crown dropped. Jackson lunged for it, catching it mid-air. The king roared, sea magic lashing out, but Jackson had already thrown the crown into the whirlpool above. Let the sea take what it never should have had. Back in the temple, Maria and Juno clashed in a whirlwind of steel and scales. Blades rang, fangs snapped. Maria ducked and rolled, slicing along Juno's tail. Juno hissed and knocked her back with a coiled strike. You were mine, she shrieked. I was never yours, she snarled, thrusting her sword into Juno's chest. Juno screamed and began to unravel. Her form twisted, melted into sea foam and bone, vanishing with a final gasp of fury. The whirlpool above shattered. In the chamber, the crimson crown was gone. The Sea King screamed, a sound of rage and loss. Without the crown, he began to crumble. Jackson floated toward the surface as the chamber collapsed, coral turning to dust. I curse you, the king said, voice echoing. The sea will never let you rest. Jackson smiled grimly. I'll sleep when the sun sets over dry land. He kicked off the stone, shooting upward. On the island, the whirlpool erupted, sending waves crashing in all directions. Jackson burst out of the current, soaked and alive, landing hard on the broken temple floor. Maria caught his arm. You did it. Eli helped him up. You always make the biggest mess just before breakfast. Sawyer looked toward the horizon. The sea is still. The king is gone. Jackson looked back at the crumbling altar. No, he's dormant. Maria nodded. But his crown is gone, lost to the sea. The crew gathered, broken, exhausted, alive. They had reached the Isle of No Return, and somehow they had returned. As they sailed away days later, the island disappeared behind them, swallowed by mist. No one spoke for a while, until Eli finally said, So, what now? Treasure gone, sea angry, horses seasick. Jackson looked out at the waves. There's always another map. But next time, he looked at Maria. We sail by sunrise, not moonlight. She smiled. Deal. The crimson mare turned toward the rising sun. Their next legend waited. But for now, they'd survived the Crimson Sea. 3 days passed since the fall of the Sea King.
The Crimson Mare sailed under clear skies and golden sunsets. The crew, toe-tired and wounded, moved with renewed energy. The horrors of the sea seemed to have faded into the past. But peace in cursed waters never lasts long. It began with the birds. Dozens of seabirds circling the same patch of water, not flying, not diving, just spinning in slow, hypnotic loops, as though caught in a silent storm. Then came the tide. It shifted sideways, against the wind, against the current, a quiet, unnatural surge that pushed the Crimson Mare slightly off course. Old Man Sawyer noticed it first. He stood at the bow, lips pursed. The sea's moving, but not the water. Maria joined him. Explain that again, but less like a riddle.
He pointed ahead. The land is moving. At first, no one believed him, but there it was, an island rising on the horizon, drifting across the sea like a great whale. Cliffs and trees and fog rising from its surface, and yet no waves broke against it. It glided silently, steady as a ship with no sails. Eli Granger squinted through the spyglass. Looks like a regular island to me. Jackson took the spyglass, his brows furrowed. No, it isn't. Look at the base. The roots of the island didn't end in rock. They ended in legs, massive ones, covered in stone, seaweed, and coral. Dozens of them like a crab or a centipede, churning slowly beneath the sea. Eli cursed. Tell me that's not real. Sawyer lowered his head. That's no island. That's an Aracanoth. Maria's eyes widened. A sea beast from the old tales. They said it carried an entire kingdom on its back. Not a kingdom, but a prison. They gathered on the deck as the creature drew closer, its moving landmass towering above them like a floating fortress. Strange stone towers rose from the highest cliffs, some broken, some glowing faintly. The ship rocked gently as the Aracanoth drifted past, and on its back they saw movement. Figures. Walking. Watching. Some with lanterns, some with spears, some not human. Jackson lowered the spyglass. It's not just an island. Maria's voice was low. It's a city. Alive. Moving. Suddenly, from the island's base, a great anchor of bone dropped into the sea, slamming into the ocean floor with a boom that shook the Crimson Mare. The creature had stopped. A rumbling chant echoed across the water, like the hum of 100 voices beneath the waves. Sawyer clutched his stones. It's inviting us. Jackson looked at Maria. You said you left something behind in these waters. Is it up there? She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, yes. Eli groaned. I was afraid you'd say that. The crew lowered the rowboat. Jackson, Maria, Eli, and Sawyer climbed in, leaving the remaining sailors on board with strict orders. If the island sinks, don't follow. They rowed slowly toward the sea beast's edge, where great stone steps were carved into its shell, half covered in moss and dripping with seawater. As they ascended, the sea grew quiet. And then, voices greeted them. Not in welcome, but in memory. Whispers from the past echoed through the stone. Turn back. You do not belong here. The weight of the dead walks behind you. Jackson kept walking, Maria beside him. Up the stairs into the jungle of the moving island. At the top they found the city. Or what was left of it. A ruined metropolis, carved from coral and obsidian, choked in vines and haunted by statues that bled water from their eyes. Strange lights floated through the alleys. The sky above seemed lower, like a dome painted in storm clouds. And at the center stood a great tower with no door. Just a spiral staircase carved on the outside, winding all the way to its peak. Maria stared at it. That's where I left it. Jackson didn't ask what it was. He just nodded. And together, they stepped onto the spiral.
The wind howled around the spiral staircase, cutting like a blade as it swept in from all directions. The tower that loomed above Jackson and Maria seemed to stretch into the Stord itself, taller than any lighthouse, more ancient than the coral cities beneath the sea. It had no door, no windows, only the staircase coiled along its outside, hugging the slick black stone like a serpent's spine. Eli Granger stood at the base looking up. That's unreasonable. Why couldn't it just have a proper entrance like a normal cursed building? Maria didn't smile. She just stepped forward. Because it was built to keep something in, not people out. They climbed. Step by step, the storm thickened. The wind wasn't just wind, it whispered. Not nonsense. Memories. Each step triggered fragments of the past, half-seen images drifting across their eyes like dreams. Maria paused as she heard her younger self laughing, a pirate's laugh, wild and reckless. Jackson heard gunfire, desert wind, his brother's voice yelling from behind a wagon. "Don't look back, Jack." Sawyer saw his wife's grave. Even Eli, who rarely showed anything but sarcasm, paused, blinking rapidly. "I heard my ma. She used to sing that when I was sick." No one said a word. They kept climbing. Halfway up, the staircase shifted, not crumbled, moved, as though the tower had become aware of their presence. The wind stopped, and from above came a soft chime. Not a bell, a chain. Maria froze. "It's awake." Eli looked over the edge. What it exactly? Maria placed her hand against the stone. "The thing I locked inside this tower 10 years ago." Jackson turned to her. "You never told us what you left behind." She nodded slowly. "Because it wasn't a what, it was a who." At the top of the tower, the sky opened into a shattered ring of clouds. The sun tried to break through but couldn't. The summit was flat and circular, ringed with pillars carved with pirate runes and sea king glyphs. And at the center was a throne, empty. Chains lay broken around it, crusted in salt. Maria stepped forward slowly. "She's not here." Then the shadows moved, and from behind the throne rose a figure, tall, wrapped in robes of barnacle-crusted silk, face hidden beneath a mask with no mouth. A woman, barefoot, floating inches above the ground. Jackson drew his revolver. "Is that her?" Maria whispered. "Her name is Salura, my sister." Salura's voice entered their minds, not their ears. "You returned. To finish the job." Maria flinched. "No, to free you." "Liar!" The sky cracked with thunder. Salura's body twisted in the air, her robes unraveling like seaweed, revealing skin like polished obsidian, veins of gold running through it like fire. Her mask cracked, revealing a mouth filled with coral fangs. "You chained me here because I wanted the crown, and now you come without it." Maria shouted over the storm. "The crown is gone. The king is dead. The sea is changing." Salura spread her arms. "Then let it change into fire."
The battle was immediate. Salura moved like a wraith, her fingers trailing light that burned whatever it touched. Eli fired twice. Both bullets melted midair. Sawyer tried to chant, but Salura silenced him with a glance, freezing his lips shut. Jackson stepped forward, firing one shot, then another, both direct hits to her chest. Salura staggered. Maria surged forward, sword drawn. "Sister!" The two clashed, blade against magic, memory against power. Maria cut deep, but Salura caught her wrist and whispered in her mind, "You left me. Now feel what I felt." Maria screamed and dropped to her knees, clutching her head. Jackson caught her before she fell from the edge. Salura hovered above, preparing a final blow. Jackson raised a flare gun, not to shoot her, but the sky. He fired. The red light burst upward.
The crew aboard the Crimson Mare, far below, saw the flare and pulled a lever. A charge planted earlier on the creature's spine detonated. The tower shuddered. Salura turned in fury. "What have you done?" Jackson stood, bloodied. "Cut the leash." The tower cracked, stones splitting. Salura leaped to her feet, blade flashing. One strike, she plunged it through Salura's chest. Her sister screamed, not in pain, but in release. The wind stopped, the sky cleared, and Salura fell, peaceful at last. The tower began to collapse. Jackson and Maria jumped, grabbing a chain that unraveled down the side like a rope. They slid, falling, swinging, landing hard into the waiting arms of Sawyer and Eli. The tower crumbled behind them, and the island began to sink. Back aboard the Crimson Mare, they watched from a distance as the moving island folded in on itself, collapsing into the sea with a roar of thunder and mist. Maria leaned on Jackson's shoulder, breath shallow. "She's gone." Jackson nodded. "But so is the prison." Sawyer looked to the horizon. "We're not out of the sea yet, but the chains that held it are broken." And for the first time since the journey began, the ocean was still. The sea stretched calm and infinite, a mirror of silver under a pale blue sky. No clouds, no wind, just the steady creak of the Crimson Mare as it sailed farther from the place where the living island had sunk into memory. But for the first time since they'd left land, the crew did not cheer. Too many had been lost, too much had changed, and now something was wrong. Jackson Cole stood alone at the helm, staring at the compass Sawyer had passed him an hour earlier. It spun without rest. No matter how still the ship sailed, the needle refused to point north or anywhere. It turned in slow, uncertain circles, like a drunk outlaw searching for a fight. Maria joined him at the wheel. "Still no heading?" She didn't look up. "It's not broken, it's searching." She watched the compass spin. That's how the sea feels right now, like it forgot which way is home. Eli approached with a tin mug of coffee and a bandage on his shoulder. "Maybe we've gone so deep into cursed waters even direction gave up." Old Man Sawyer limped toward them with his tattered sea charts, obsidian stones rattling in his pouch. "There's a tale about this from the first sailors who reached the center of the Serpent Sea." Jackson turned. "What tale?" Sawyer tapped the compass. "The pointless north, a stretch of ocean where time forgets itself, where memory eats the stars, and compasses spin like coins tossed by fate." Eli sipped his coffee. "Sounds like nonsense." "No," Sawyer said softly. "It means we're near the cradle of the first fire." Maria's brows lifted. "I thought that was a myth." Sawyer met her eyes. "So was the Sea King. So was your sister." That night, the sea remained flat as a frozen lake. No stars above, no moon, only the compass still spinning. Jackson stayed on deck long after the others slept. He stared at the horizon, lit a match and let it burn down to his fingers before blowing it out. Then he saw something, a glow, not from the sky, from beneath the sea, faint, pulsing, a steady heartbeat of orange and gold. He knelt and touched the water. It was warm. Morning came without sunlight, just a low, glowing mist that covered everything in amber haze. Maria rose first, blade strapped to her back, and found Jackson already awake. He pointed ahead. "It's coming from there." They all gathered at the bow, Jackson, Maria, Eli, Sawyer, and the 5 remaining sailors. Out of the mist rose something unexpected, a lighthouse, but not like any they'd seen before.
It stood on a lone spire of obsidian rock, its light a constant flame, not flickering but breathing, alive. It turned slowly, casting waves of heat across the water. Eli stared. "That thing's burning with no fuel." Sawyer nodded. "It's the first flame, the one the Sea King stole to warm the deep before the world knew fire." Maria frowned. "What's it doing here?" Jackson's jaw clenched. "It's waiting." They approached slowly, anchoring beside the rock. No stairs, no path, just a long rusted chain hanging from the top of the lighthouse, swaying lightly as if inviting them to climb. Jackson looked at Maria. "Want to see what fire feels like when it remembers who lit it?" She sighed. "You really don't like beaches, do you?" He grinned, grabbed the chain, and began to climb. Inside, the lighthouse was hollow. No floors, just a wide chamber with glowing symbols pulsing along the walls, ancient, curved runes like waves and teeth. At the very top floated the flame itself. It wasn't fire like they knew. It was spherical, like a sun, the size of a horse's heart, pulsing gold and red and white. As Jackson stepped near, his scars burned. Maria stepped behind him, shielding her eyes. "It's alive." The flame flickered. Then it spoke, not with words, but visions. Ships burning on stormy seas. The Sea King wearing the crown for the first time. Maria as a child staring into a storm. Jackson standing alone, revolver drawn, facing something too big to kill. And finally, a mountain under the sea, shaped like a skull. A voice echoed in Jackson's mind. "What you buried is waking again." The flame dimmed. Then it flared once and vanished. In its place hung a new compass. Black metal, red needle, still. Jackson reached out, took it. It pulsed once in his hand and pointed due east. For the first time in days, a direction. Back on the ship, Sawyer examined it. This compass only points to truth, not safety, not treasure, just what must be faced. Eli spat over the rail. "Great, so what? More monsters?" Sawyer's eyes were distant, worse, the ones that wear human faces. Jackson pocketed the compass. "Then we sail east." Maria looked at him. "Even if it kills us?" Jackson adjusted his hat. "Even if it kills us." The Crimson Mare turned eastward, toward fire, memory, and something none of them could name yet. The sea changed with each passing mile. The blue grew darker, not storm dark, but deep, as if the ship were gliding over a submerged world of silence and secrets. Even the Crimson Mare creaked differently, her hull groaning like it sensed what lay beneath. The new compass Jackson had taken from the lighthouse of the first flame pointed steadily east, glowing faintly in his palm when he held it up to the wind. They followed its pull, and on the fourth day the water turned glass green. And then came the shapes, rising slowly under the surface. Not rocks, buildings.
Old Man Sawyer stood at the rail, eyes wide. "By the stars, it's real!" Maria joined him. "What is?" Sawyer exhaled. "The drowned republic, a kingdom that chose the sea over land and paid the price." Beneath them, the outlines of spires and domes and towers rippled like memories through the water. Flags still clung to poles beneath the waves. Mosaics gleamed faintly on collapsed plazas. Great statues of armored kings leaned sideways, mouths open as if to scream. Eli squinted. "They say this place sank overnight." Jackson nodded and never stopped falling. As they sailed slowly over the ruins, a fog rose, one that shimmered gold around the edges. Not mist exactly,
something thicker. The air became heavy. Breathing it felt like swallowing memory. And that's when they heard it. Music. Soft, faint, like a choir buried underwater. Jackson raised the compass. It glowed brighter. Maria's hand fell to her sword. This place is alive. They dropped anchor beside a half-submerged tower, its roof barely breaking the surface. From there, steps descended beneath the waves into the heart of the sunken republic. "We're going in?" Eli asked, incredulous. "We have to," Jackson replied. "The compass demands it." Sawyer wrapped a charm around his neck. "Down there lies the vault." Maria turned. "A vault?" Sawyer nodded. "With the Republic stored the original map, the first chart to the Sea King's crown." "But the crown is gone," Maria said. Sawyer shook his head. "The Sea King's mind isn't, and that vault might show us who else has found it." Jackson nodded. "Then we dive." The descent was slow, their feet landing on stone slick with age. Moss hung like curtains. Light filtered through cracks in the ceiling above, casting the scene in shifting green and gold. Inside the tower, murals covered every surface, images of a once great civilization. One panel showed the Republic's founders building a floating city. Another depicted a sea king offering them fire in exchange for loyalty. And then, betrayal. A panel where those same founders stabbed the king in the back, binding his spirit beneath the sea. Eli whispered, "They helped make him." Sawyer nodded, and they feared what they'd done, so they hid the truth. Jackson stared at the final mural, a vault door, ringed with chains, and behind it, eyes, watching, waiting. They reached the vault, carved in coral and iron, covered with sigils long forgotten. As they approached, the air grew colder, even beneath the sea. Time itself seemed to slow. Jackson pressed his hand to the lock. The compass in his pocket pulsed once, and the door creaked open. Inside was a round chamber, perfectly preserved. The floor was carved with the original map, a spiral galaxy of coasts, islands, and symbols. At its center, the Eye of Karos, a place not marked on any modern chart. Sawyer stepped forward, breath caught. "It's real." Eli pointed. "That's our next stop?" Jackson nodded. "No, that's our final stop." But something else caught Maria's attention. A shadow moved across the map, not theirs. She turned fast, blade up, but it was already gone. Just the echo of a laugh, low, familiar, cold. Back on the Crimson Mare, they surfaced to a sky that had changed. Clouds now swirled in unnatural rings. A thin stream of black smoke rose in the distance, straight into the heavens. Jackson held the compass. It spun once, then pointed directly at the smoke. Maria asked, "What is it?" Jackson's jaw tensed. A warning. Sawyer clutched his cloak. "The Sea King is waking, in someone else's skin." Jackson looked east, and the wind whispered, "Hurry." The sea ahead was dark, not with shadow, but ash. It drifted down like black snow, coating the deck of the Crimson Mare, clouding the sky and staining the sails. The ship sailed toward the rising column of smoke, guided by the compass's relentless glow. Jackson Cole stood at the helm, the compass clenched in his left hand, his revolver strapped tight at his side. Behind him, Maria Vega adjusted her gear, eyes narrowed toward the horizon. "This isn't from fire," she said. "It's from something burning beneath." Eli leaned over the rail, spitting into the black water. "I don't like this. Ash falls when the world ends." Old Man Sawyer muttered, "Not the end, a replacement." Jackson turned. "Explain." Sawyer held up a worn page torn from his oldest book. There was a ritual in the Sea King's time. If his crown was lost, he could return, but not as himself. Maria frowned.
Then how? In someone else's body. The island they approached was jagged, barren, nothing but black stone, twisted trees, and shattered bones. The column of smoke rose from its center like a spear piercing the clouds. But as they neared the shore, the first signs appeared. Symbols etched in blood across the rocks. Familiar ones. Sea King glyphs. Jackson narrowed his eyes. Someone's recreating the Sea King's memory. They docked in silence. The air was thick with soot and whispering winds. Not voices, not wind, just breath, cold, steady, watching. The trail led them into a forest of ash and bone. Skeletons were fused into trees. Masks, like those worn by the Sea King's undead, hung from branches like fruit. At the center of it all stood a stone altar, glowing faintly. Laid upon it, a body, fresh, breathing, bound in coral chains. The man was young, pale, tattoos of the deep inked across his chest. His eyes were closed, but the skin on his forehead was cracking, revealing gold underneath. Maria whispered, "Who is he?" Sawyer stepped forward, trembling. The Sea King's vessel. Eli raised his pistols. Then let's end this before he wakes. But it was too late. The body's eyes snapped open, burning crimson. The air exploded outward as the man levitated above the altar, chains snapping, golden light pulsing from his chest. When he spoke, it was with two voices, one young, one ancient. "You stole my crown." Maria stepped forward. "You were buried, and now reborn." Jackson raised his gun. "You don't belong in this world anymore." The Sea King laughed through cracked lips. "Neither do you." He raised his hand and the earth broke around them. From beneath the black soil, guardians emerged, half human, half sea beast abominations, wrapped in barnacle armor and wielding rusted tridents. The final war had begun. The crew fought with fury. Eli gunned down the first guardian, only to be struck and thrown back into a pile of bones.
Maria danced through two attackers, her blade glowing with heat from the flame's blessing. She reached the Sea King, slashed across his chest, but he didn't flinch. Jackson charged, revolver blazing. Every bullet struck true. But still, the Sea King smiled. He raised both arms and the island itself lifted, rock and bone rising into the air like a broken throne. Sawyer shouted, "We must bind him again with fire and memory." Maria grabbed Sawyer's talisman and plunged it into the altar's base. Flames burst upward, wrapping around the Sea King's host. He howled, thrashing in midair. Jackson stepped forward with the flame compass in hand, its light now white-hot. "You chose the wrong skin and the wrong world." He plunged the compass into the Sea King's chest. The scream that followed shattered the altar. The possessed man arched backward, gold light bursting from his eyes, mouth, and chest. And then... silence. The host collapsed. Still, empty. Human again. The guardians crumbled. The ash stopped falling. The island began to sink. Maria helped Jackson to his feet. "Is it over?" Sawyer placed a hand over his heart. "For now, but the Sea King's soul is still out there, searching." Eli limped over, wiping blood from his lip. "Then we'd better stay ahead of him." Jackson looked out over the sea. The compass in his hand was dead. No glow, no direction. Only the sea, and what waited beyond it. The sea had calmed, but the crew of the Crimson Mare knew better than to trust it. No wind, no birds, no stars. Just an endless sky of gray and a horizon that refused to move. Jackson Cole stood at the bow, holding the lifeless compass. Once the flame's gift, it now lay cold and dark in his hand. Beside him, Maria scanned the still water with tired eyes. "We killed the vessel, Jack.
Why does it still feel like he's watching? Old Man Sawyer approached from below deck, his ancient book clutched tightly. He is, but not with eyes, with memory. Sawyer placed the book on the deck and opened to a page they hadn't seen before. It showed a sky filled with bones, whale skeletons, twisted sails, and wreckage drifting in the air. "That's the final warning," he said. "The Sea Gales Cemetery." Eli raised a brow. "A graveyard? In the sky?" Sawyer nodded. "A place where wind died, where lost ships float in the heavens and speak only to those with unfinished stories." Jackson stared at the horizon. The wind shifted, and for the first time in days, the sails moved. A cold breeze swept through the rigging. The smell of old bones filled the air. They followed the wind. East still, though the compass was dead, the sea darkened beneath them, not black, but hollow, depthless, echoing. And then they saw it. Above them, suspended in the sky like a god's forgotten dream, the grave wind span. A bridge of wrecked ships, frozen midair, ancient sails flapping without wind, hulls splintered, masts cracked, hundreds of vessels tangled together, creating a floating bridge that stretched across the clouds. Maria whispered, "Those are real ships." Eli squinted. Some of them still got flags. Jackson spotted one he recognized, a black flag with a silver thorn. That was Captain Lyra's crew. They vanished 10 years ago. They didn't vanish. They joined the wind. The crimson mare passed beneath the graveyard. Whispers filled the rigging. Not voices of the dead, but of those who almost lived. Regrets. Choices never made. Lovers left. Fires not lit. Jackson felt a tremor in his chest, a memory of his brother, his father's last words, his own footsteps walking away from everything. Maria stumbled, holding her head. Sawyer shouted, "It's the wind! It carries what we won't speak!" Eli muttered, "Then we're all doomed." Suddenly, the ship lurched. Something had latched on. Above them, a figure dropped from the tangled hulls. Not a ghost, a man, but not a man. His eyes were stitched shut, his skin burned and glowing. He wore a hat like Jackson's, but blackened, cracked, and steaming. He landed on the deck with a bone sword in hand. Sawyer gasped, "That's a wind keeper!" Maria raised her blade. "Thought we were myth." Eli cocked both pistols. "Everything is till it tries to kill us." The wind keeper moved like smoke, twisting, blinking, striking. Jackson met him with steel and grit. Their blades clashed, sparks flying. The wind keeper didn't bleed. Each wound let out a gasp of storm wind. But Jackson fought harder. "You wear a dead man's coat. Let me bury you in it." With a final spin, Jackson struck through the windkeeper's chest. The creature exploded into a gust of wind that tore through the sails, then vanished. As the wind settled, a single feather floated down. White, glowing. Jackson caught it. The compass in his pocket pulsed once. He pulled it out. The needle turned and pointed straight through the sky. Sawyer stared. "The wind has chosen you." Jackson looked up at the grave wind span. Above the bridge, far in the distance, floated a lighthouse of bone. Maria saw it too. "That's where the last piece is, isn't it?" Jackson nodded. "It's time we meet the first sailor."
Jackson stepped forward. "You're the first sailor?" The man nodded. "Names don't matter here. But yes, I took the first map, the first ship, the first oath, and I saw what waited at the edge of the sea." Maria asked quietly, "Did you see the Sea King?" The first sailor's smile faded. I saw him before he was king, when he was just a man, hungry, angry, searching for something to bind the waves." Eli scoffed. "And you helped him?" "No," the first sailor said. "I feared him. So I drew the first line on the sea, hoping no one would cross it." He looked at Jackson. "But they did. Over and over." Jackson raised the compass. "The crown is gone, but the king's memory moves." The sailor nodded. "He's looking for his throne. That's all he's ever wanted." Sawyer asked, "Where is it?" The sailor pointed to the swirling rain above their heads. "Beneath that, in the eye of the storm, the hollow deep." Jackson narrowed his eyes. "So how do we reach it?" The sailor leaned forward. "You must return something you've taken." Maria blinked. "Taken?" The sailor's eyes found Jackson. You carry his mark." Silence filled the chamber. Jackson stiffened. "I don't." The sailor's voice deepened. "You survived the Crimson Crown. You touched the flame. You opened the vault. The Sea King watches through you now." Maria stepped back slightly. Eli reached for his gun. Sawyer whispered, "He's right." Jackson clenched his fists. "Then let him watch, but he won't win." The sailor nodded. "Then take my last gift." He lifted one hand, and from the swirling maps behind him came a piece of sky, hardened into glass. It floated to Jackson. "A star chart that moves. It will guide you to the hollow deep." As Jackson took it, the chamber shook. The sailor smiled faintly. "He knows. He's waiting. And when you arrive, you will not fight him as a man." Jackson asked, "Then how?" The sailor's eyes dimmed. "You'll fight him as a memory." The light above burst, the lighthouse cracked, and in a blink they were back on the Crimson Mare, floating over a churning ocean. The compass pointed down. The wind howled. Sawyer gasped. "The hollow deep is open." Maria drew her blade. "Then let's end it." The Crimson Mare hovered above the center of the sea, where wind and water collapsed inward into a vast spiraling whirlpool, so deep it seemed to swallow not just the ocean, but light itself. The compass in Jackson Cole's hand pulsed steadily, pointing down, into the abyss, into the hollow deep. He turned to the crew, Maria, Eli, Sawyer, and the few remaining sailors who had made it through monsters, storms, and madness. Jackson's voice was steady. "No turning back." Maria nodded. "We never did." Sawyer closed his book one last time. "The Sea King waits in the place no map dares mark." Eli smirked. "Then it's a good day to disappear." The ship tilted as the whirlpool pulled them in. No one screamed. No one blinked. They dived. The wind roared, the mast cracked, and the sky vanished behind them. The Crimson Mare spun through tunnels of pressure and dark light, its sails flaming with the last spark of the first flame. And then, stillness. They had arrived. The hollow deep. It was not sea, not sky, not earth. It was a realm between moments, a chasm of memory and fate. Giant bones floated like constellations, the remains of ancient beasts and forgotten kings. Lanterns drifted without flame. Time itself bent like waves in the heat. And at its heart
stood a throne of coral, gold, and ash, empty until now. From the shadows emerged a figure, his body flickering like a candle underwater. The Sea King, not in a body of flesh, but one of will. His eyes were galaxies. His voice was thunder. You have carried my story far, cowboy. Jackson stepped forward. I came to end it. The Sea King raised a hand. The hollow deep came alive. Memories attacked. Phantoms of the past. Jackson's brother, Maria's sister Salura, the drowned crew of Lyra's ship. They moved like smoke, but struck like steel. Eli fought beside Maria, covering her with pistols blazing. Sawyer chanted the ancient runes, drawing light from the bones around them. But the phantoms kept coming, until Jackson dropped his guns and reached inside himself. For the memory he never spoke aloud. He saw himself, years ago, kneeling beside his dying father, blood on the sand, a promise unkept. I'll never run again. He opened that wound and let the pain burn. The hollow deep shook. The Sea King hesitated. You dare weaponize regret? Jackson's voice was low. It's the only thing you can't wear. He stepped forward, each footfall cracking the floor of memory. And with the compass in one hand and the flame star in the other, he struck. Light exploded. The Sea King screamed, not in pain, but in recognition. His form unraveled, the throne shattered. The hollow deep began to collapse. Maria grabbed Jackson's hand. Let's go! Eli threw a rope. Sawyer called out spells. The crimson mare, rising on wings of storm, caught them just as the hollow deep caved inward, swallowed by the very silence it had birthed. And then, daylight, real, golden, and warm. They surfaced into a calm sea. No whirlpool, no throne.
Just waves and wind. The compass lay in Jackson's hand, still, for the first time, not pointing. It didn't need to. The journey was done. Epilogue. Weeks later, in a quiet port far from cursed waters, Jackson sat by a fire, carving a small map into a wooden table. Maria entered with a bottle and 2 glasses. Still drawing? Just marking the places that tried to kill us. She poured a drink. That'll be a crowded chart. He looked at her. You sticking around? She smiled. We've got more seas to forget. From across the room, a child pointed at the sky. What's that star? His mother whispered. A new one. They say it rose the night the sea let go of its king. In the heavens above the world, far beyond maps, a single feather drifted slowly, glowing in the wind, watching, waiting for the next cowboy brave enough to ride the crimson seas.